YouTube, welcome back to another episode of Cello Chat, which I know I need to start with an apology because I'm acutely aware that I have not actually made and released a proper video since, well, before my hair color changed, which is well over 2 months ago. I apologize. A lot of general life getting in the way, as well as a really busy start to the concert season and a really busy start to the academic year, and that is precisely what led me to making today's video. Because this year, this autumn, I've had a huge new intake into my class, both live here in London but also online. And when you take on that many new students in quite a short period of time, it's very, very interesting because you start to see a very definite pattern of problems that pretty much everyone presents with to some degree or another. So I decided to share the top 5 of those that I see with you in this episode here today. Why? Because I just really want to draw your attention to these things so that if you're having lessons and working with a teacher, you can really, ask yourself if that's something that in my lessons we're really spending proper quality time on, and that, my teacher has got really high standards on, or if you're trying to work by yourself, to ask yourself, is this something which I truly understand, or is that something which I do perhaps need some help with? So now, without much further ado, let me first of all run you through the list of issues that I see, and then I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more depth. Now, number 1, I make it number 1 because it's the most fundamental one of all, and that is setup. What do I mean by setup? By setup, I mean, first of all, posture, how we sit on the chair, how we sit with the instrument. Are we nicely balanced on chair? Do we have a nice straight upper body without twisting our shoulders? Now, the twisting of, well, actually you can't twist the shoulders by themselves. The twisting of the spine, is especially the left shoulder going backwards, is a habit that I really see pretty much across the board. Setup. Secondly, of course, the big one, bow hold. Now, bow hold isn't actually in its most basic form not that difficult to learn, especially not if you follow my method. I'm linking the video to that and lots of other videos below for reference, but it's something which takes a long time to solidify. So it's something which you will have to go through this whole sort of proper pickup process again and again and again and again, really, we're not talking for a few days, not for a few weeks, not even for a few months, for a really long time, until you've developed the sufficient sort of muscles for it and the muscle memory, really. But that is something which, when I start someone off from scratch with my students, I'm absolutely uncompromising about. That bow hold has got to be right, because otherwise not much else will start to work. And lastly, of course, setup also means proper positioning of the left arm and good left hand shape. And again, this is something where really almost in every person who comes through my door initially, I see a lot of issues. Now, number 2 is again a really fundamental one, and that is sound production. Of course, one follows on from the other. If you haven't got good posture, if you especially haven't got a good bow hold, sound production will be a tough ask. What do I mean by sound production? I want to hear a really nice, deep, resonant cello sound. What I do not want to hear, and what I hear far, far, far too much of, is a very surfacey sound. It goes a little bit like that. That is generated very largely by just the hand moving, which is of course not what we want. We want to really use the big back muscles, and especially our upper arm, to really draw that sound out of the cello. In order to get that from day one, we need to understand what is the role of the upper arm, what is the role of the lower arm, how do I use this, which one do I use for which part of the bow, and especially this concept of really dead weight in the arm, yeah, of just learning to let go and not holding tension. So again, that is something which, when I work with absolute beginners, we don't even go anywhere near starting with the left hand until that has been pretty securely established. Yeah, so I would expect any of my beginner students to be able to make a really healthy, completely scratch-free, deep, resonant sound. And that is, when it's properly explained and the steps are properly followed, something that you can actually achieve quite quickly. Of course, it will need a lifetime of developing and refining, but on a basic level, that's something that is eminently achievable. Staying with the bow, number 3 is a distinct lack of awareness of bow distribution, i.e. which part of the bow should you be playing in, how much bow should we be using, at what speed should we be using the bow. Again, on a very sort of fundamental level, that is something already by learning which part of the arm is responsible for which part of the bow, you develop an understanding, you should develop an understanding of which part of the bow you are playing in. Lower, upper, middle. So there should never really be a point. At any point when you're playing anything, on a scale, a piece or whatever, you should be able to answer the question, which part of the bow should I be using? How much bow should I be using? At what speed? Should never be random. But again, that is something where I see in most players a real lack of awareness. So make sure when you're practicing, you think about that. Next is a general lack of what I would call listening skills. And of course, especially as string players, because our whole intonation is controlled through nothing other than our ears. Yeah, there is no visual reference. Everything is controlled through these two. And that means from day one, we have to learn to use them. Of course, when you're starting out, you will be missing notes left, right, and center, and that is totally okay. What is important, however, is that when we do miss those notes, we are able to tell, is that note too high? Is that note too low? So we're able to correct. Learning to self-correct is something that should really be taught right from the beginning. And then you will find it much, much easier, because that way, sort of the instrument that is your ear, that tool that is that sort of measuring tool that is your ear, will be sharpened very, very, very quickly. And the more listening is a very active skill, the more you really strain to figure out, hang on a second, was that too high? Was that too low? Let's do that again. That's when your ear becomes better and better and better. And over time, you'll realize you have to correct less and less and less. Of course, listening skills also extends to sound quality, to rhythm, to lots and lots of other things. But learning to listen to ourselves is the most fundamental thing we have to learn in order to progress. And lastly, the one that perhaps sums up all the other ones to a certain degree is what I would call too much too soon. What I see time and time and time again is players who have really been, in a sometimes very short space of time, been rushed through, especially here in England with the whole grade system, been rushed through those grades without learning the fundamental skills that are the building blocks of playing the cello in a really systematic way. Be that sound production, be that setup, be it positions, shifting, whatever. And I see so many people when they come to me for the first time playing repertoire, which is vastly too complex for the skill set that they have at this point. And of course, I totally appreciate, when I was a teenager, I was no different. You want to play all the exciting stuff, you want to play the bar suites or whatever, but they are absolutely not suitable material for learning your craft. Yeah, we are learning our craft in order to eventually be able to do those things. And funny enough, the one thing that I have noticed, that there is a certain point at which people most commonly sort of what I would call hits the ceiling, i.e. it doesn't matter how much they practice, they keep repeating the same piece, they simply stop improving. And that is, in the sort of British grade system, roughly around the grade 5 mark. Yeah? To give you an idea of what that means, so at that point you will need to use all the neck positions up to 7th position, start doing some of the more complex scales, the E majors, the A flat majors, all of this stuff, and that is usually the point where this whole house of cards tends to start crumbling down. And why? Because if you think about it, if in every single one of the foundational skills, be it the setup, be it the bow hold, the sound production, the left hand shape, therefore then obviously the shifting, learning to use the bow properly, bow distribution, if in all of these elements there are significant gaps, there are holes in it. Yeah, if you have a house with foundations that are essentially constituted like a Swiss cheese, sooner or later that's going to come crumbling down. Yeah, and it's very interesting that it's pretty much always at that point where people often say to me, I've been practicing this piece for I don't know how many months, I can't get any better at it. I just, it doesn't matter what I do, it's just not getting any better. And that's really the point at which, when people come to me, I then really have to say, and that's not always an easy conversation to have, look, in order to move forward, we're going to have to put all this stuff aside, strip things back, and start to systematically, one thing after another, fix the foundations. And the moment, and luckily, people usually realize very, very quickly that as we start to fix one thing after another, that the gains are huge and they're almost immediate, and they're huge. But usually by that point, there's so many different elements that have got issues that it really takes quite a while to remedy all of that before we then back, at this sort of what I would call healthy, sustainable grade 5 level, where we can then start to build upwards. Now, the question is this sort of experience of really hitting the wall, is that something that is just par the course, or can that be avoided? If so, how do we avoid it? Well, from my own experience, not just as a teacher, but of course also as somebody who went through the whole process of learning the cello and certainly hit that ceiling more than once, looking back on it, the best bit of advice that I can give you is the point at which you need the very best teacher you can find and afford is the day you start playing the cello, not 2 years, 5 years, 10 years later. Because what I hear a lot often is from people who say, oh yeah, I'll you know, I'm not good enough for you yet, you know, I'll start to get sort of, you know, lessons with a proper teacher once I'm a little bit better. You know, until then I'll just, you know, continue going down to the road to the guy, you know, who sort of roughly knows how to play the cello. He also fixes cars and does a bit of gardening, but, you know, hey, obviously I'm exaggerating, but not entirely. Yeah, so teaching properly teaching beginners is the most highly specialized skill in instrumental teaching. Yeah, anyone can do a half decent job teaching college students or postgrads or whatever. That is a lot easier. And I say this as someone who really does, and actually probably not that many people out there who do this, really teach the full spectrum from first lesson all the way up to conservatoire, postgrads, whatever, the whole spectrum. The harder thing is not to teach those guys how to play the Dvorak concerto. The hardest thing is to properly set someone up from day one. And so this is really the thing that I would say to you, and perhaps listening to this little cello chat episode, some of this might resonate with you, and you might be thinking, you know what, you're talking about me here. I have been going absolutely nowhere for ages. Well, if that's how you feel, you may very well be one of those people where really the foundations have got to first of all be fixed in order for you to go further. Yeah. So or perhaps, you know, you say, actually, yeah, all of this stuff, you know, is my teacher is nagging me all the time about this stuff, you know, and this is all going really well, in which case, brilliant. That's exactly, you know, if somebody is really fussy about detail and fussy about and corrects you every time that bow hold isn't right and every time that note is not quite in tune, then they are doing a good job. Conversely, if you know, it's all a bit airy-fairy, as we say in England, and you don't get a lot of very precise information as to how to fix something, then perhaps that might be an indication that it's time to look elsewhere. So now, as usual, if you have any questions, comments on anything that we've just discussed, pop it into the comment section below. I'm really looking forward to hearing from everyone again. And of course, if you have any sort of niggles or so about perhaps, you know, you're not quite ready for lessons or you can't afford lessons, you can also check out on my website my monthly sort of drop-in surgery, Julia's Cello Cafe, where we are really dissecting all of those things, and it's also a great opportunity not just to learn from your own issues, but also from the issues that other people bring. So do check that out as well. In fact, actually, then the next one is coming up quite soon. So I promise to get back into a more regular rhythm of making videos from now on, and I really look forward to seeing you again soon.